Hello. So this is a recording post conference because we mistakenly forgot to press the record button, but mistakes can happen. And yes, now this is just me recording. I'm Selu, one of the people that runs the conference, and I'm presenting on Hásæti, an interdisciplinary analysis of the high seat as a shared space. First, a lot of research has been done on the seat figurines, not only because they are fascinating, but more so because we really don't conclusively know what they are or what purpose they held. They are fascinating complications, as some would say. To be fair, a lot of these theories are supported, so I hope that my presentation doesn't come across as trying to disprove any other well supported research. Good research, after all, is, in my opinion, a group effort. A lot of my research only exists because of research that has already come before or is currently in the process. The only topic I will be challenging today is the phrase the CRS's seat, as I think it is often overused to discuss the seat figurines, and as I'm about to show, a bit of a misnomer. Although the CRS's seat is a valid interpretation, which we'll talk about later, I hope this research can expand current understandings of these figurines being just that, beyond just that one interpretation, as more than likely seat figurines would have meant more than just one story or have one conclusive meaning. This presentation is coming after I published an article about a year and a half ago on the seat figurines. Research on this topic is quite vast. There are a lot of conclusions and theories on the topic. However, I noticed that there were some patterns in the literature that are supported by archaeology that give a really interesting conclusion. My focus at the time of writing the article was on the high seat as a shared gender space specifically. However, after researching a bit further, I've changed my conclusions a bit. So this presentation comes as more of a follow-up to what I've been researching since the publication happened. And someone in the Q&A did ask during the conference what the title of that was. I honestly can't remember. It was something really bland, like take a seat. If you just look up my name, which is here, Seluvaia Ita, and look up granite, as in the rock or the stone, look up granite journal, it'll pop right up. Take a seat, something, something, something. I can't remember exactly what it was. But yes, you can find that. It's still available. My title being Hásæti, that is the central word in this research, meaning that I focused on this word as I researched the literature. Hásæti broken down is hau meaning high and sæti meaning seat, thus the translation into high seat. There are various words that are translated as high seat, throne, seat, etc. Hásæti is one of the most common words translated into high seat, along with unvegi, which does appear quite often. However, one ongoing part of my research is that I suspect that these two words would have meant maybe separate things entirely, as they don't appear to be used synonymously or interchangeably. For an example, we don't find something called Hásæti and then it's later called unvegi. They're not used interchangeably. There are cases where unvegi is mentioned and the context does appear to be completely different from Hásæti. Again, this is ongoing research, but I chose to focus on Hásæti specifically because I wanted to keep the information kind of more boxed. And it's the word that appears in the mythology, which we will talk about later. The main points I hope to make are as follows. People who sat on Hásæti, generally they held high significance in the community itself. The space could be ritualistically transformed. That depends on the event, the changes that occurred during the event, and if people were invited to join into the event. Hásæti isn't actually a seat, not a single seat anyway. It is more a position of influence in a setting. That leads to the next point, because more than one person could be sitting on the seat at any given time. And it's also, very importantly, meant to be observed by others, making it not only a space to physically share by those in the immediate space, that's including those who are observing and those who are performing, but also a space to be mentally shared by all in the vicinity. This would include those who are listening to a retelling or reading the story. So we're all meant to be observing this story one way or another. Now, what do I mean by seat figurines? These are what we are referring to in archaeology when we use the phrase seat figurines. Various representations, but mainly a figurine clearly demonstrating a chair or seat of some sort. As you can see, there are indeed representations of Hásæti being a shareable space, which again will be discussed further on with the literature, but that is looking at specifically the left picture and the most right figurine in the left picture. So you can see that there are two seats clearly marked with a partition in the middle, which is quite interesting. Jonsson and Moland in 2021 compiled the various seat figurines into types, origins, material, and a lot more. Their research is extremely thorough. I highly recommend looking into their article if you're interested in the archaeological typology of the topic. Their title is The Sovereign CRS on the Use and Meaning of a Viking Age Chair Pendant from Gudme, Denmark. One point of the research was that most seat figurines are found to be made of silver. This suggests that these figurines were popularized in the Viking Age specifically. Now, there was another Q&A question. It was regarding, I really can't remember what the figurine is called, but it was a bone seat figurine, which is quite interesting. And I was asked why I didn't use that. I couldn't remember at the time why I didn't use that. And I thought it was because I'm more focused on the silver objects, but it's because that object specifically is very much so pre-modern, heavily post-Viking Age, which is interesting because then that kind of expands the idea of the high seat and the influence that it had post-Viking Age. But because I'm only dealing with the Viking Age, that is the reason. If this person is watching again, that is the reason why I didn't use that figurine specifically. On this map, you can see southern Scandinavia dominates most of the finds, meaning that northern areas did not have these images as commonly found, which is really interesting. The red marks, which I will point out here, they're the majority of the finds. The most common find are found in female graves, which are the red markings here on the map. The second most common find is within hoards, which is in dark gray here, as an example, in here and here and here. And the third most common from metal detector finds, which are in silver, these light gray marks here. And the fourth most common within settlements, which are in green. And the least common, the fifth, I guess the least common stray finds are in black, which is just one marking here. Due to the majority of the finds being from female graves, that is where the phrase CRS seat is heavily supported with the archaeological evidence, as well as a few other things, of course. But this theory was popularized due to the grave findings, and most archaeology uses this phrase more commonly than seat figurines when referring to these images specifically. And to be fair, the literature does actually support this theory. It's from a saga called Erik Sagareithr, and we will go through it briefly to give a frame of reference for this popularization, this popularized phrase. So turning to Erik Sagareithr, I'm going to apologize ahead of time for the English translations. At the time that I had written and done this research, I didn't have access to a university library, so this is completely from the best translations I could find. So I do apologize, but you can get the context of what everything means, and I won't be able to read through the Old Norse just for time's sake. But at the time, this is the story that we're coming into that's setting the stage for the CRS and the high seat. So at the time, there was a great dearth in Greenland. Those who had been out on fishing expeditions had caught little, and some had not returned. There was in the settlement the woman whose name was Thorbjörg. She was a prophetess and was called Littlevova. She had 9 sisters, and they were all prophetesses, and she was the only one now living. The number 9 is very significant, and that she had 9 sisters is also very significant to the cultish activity at the time. In the Viking Age, 9 is a very significant number in the mythology. It was a custom of Thorbjörg in the wintertime to make a circuit, and people invited her to their houses, especially those who had any curiosity about the season, or desired to know their fate. And inasmuch as Thorkel was chief franklin thereabouts, he considered that it concerned him to know when the scarcity which overhung the settlement should cease. He invited, therefore, the prophetess to his house and prepared for her a hearty welcome, as was the custom wherever a reception was accorded a woman of this kind. Hásæti was prepared for her, and a cushion laid thereon, in which were poultry feathers. The ritual after this description actually occurs over a period of an evening and the next morning, so quite a long process. The high seat being prepared for her follows a ritualistic pattern that will be discussed and shown in other cases as well. Those who are interested in this, there are lots of other articles and research talking about the symbolism of the objects that are, because it goes into deep description about them. I don't do that here, but if you are interested, there's lots of resources talking about that specifically. Going on, the franklin, Thorkel, took her by the hand and led her to the seat prepared for her. The image of hands touching and being led to the high seat is one that does appear in other instances, suggesting that this might be one of the processes that transform the high seat's space. The story continues after she prophesies for Thorkel that each man went to ask her their fortunes, and she gives prophecies for everyone, making this an extremely public social event. This case study is often used in research when discussing any sort of ritualistic discussion on the CRS and the CRS's seat. That does include archaeology as well as literature, history, perhaps intuitively so, since the majority of the finds archaeologically are found in the female graves, so it does make sense. However, the questions that I had while researching this was, what about the rest of the sources? Is there ground material that supports maybe another theory? And what can we glean from those other texts regarding Hásæti, since this is kind of the main reference that we talk about the CRS's seat to explain these seat figurines. I wanted to turn to other sources and see if it followed over, or if there was another theory. And the main sources that we will be discussing today are Erukkvæði, Heimskringla, and Brennenjalsaga. These are just some samples from the literature to show descriptions surrounding the high seat, but there are plenty of other sources that do talk about the high seat with that word specifically, Hásæti. In the mythology from Erukkvæði, only one high seat is mentioned, one type. It's called Hliskálfi, so it has a name, giving it some sort of some sort of autonomy in some ways. One of the few instances where Hliskálfi is mentioned, it reads, Odin and Frigg both sat on Hliskálfo and saw into all the worlds. The phrasing is significant here in that it explicitly states that they both sit on the high seat together. This shows straight away that the high seat isn't actually a single seat for a single person. Also important to note here is that both Frigg and Odin have the ability to see as they sit on Hliskálfi, suggesting that it's the position that holds the real power rather than the individuals. That the seat itself holds power is also shown in Skirnismál, when Freyr sits on the seat, and this is the iconic scene of when he sees Gerður, the Jötnamaid, and sends Skirnir, his servant, after her to entice her, force her to marry him. Freyr, the son of Njord, had sat one day on Hliskálf and looked over all the worlds. Both these cases show a ritualistic-like phrasing where they sit and then see all the world, suggesting that this might be a pattern present for other Hásætir. From these case studies, we can further see it as a shared space, not only for those who sit on it, but also for those who are affected by it. So for an example, when Odin and Frigg both sit on Hliskálfi, the events that come after that story are that two human brothers are affected. When Freyr sits on Hliskálfi, Gerður, the Jötnarmaid, is affected, right? So it's not just those who sit on it to see everything, but there's always something that commences after that is significant after figures sit on the high seat. We can turn to Heimskringla next to see how the high seat might function in a political setting. In Ynglinga Saga, two brothers named Alfred and Yngvi both took kingdoms in Sweden, but it should be noted that only Alfred is referred to as King Alfred. Yngvi, his brother, was well liked because he was very good at everything he did, while Alfred was not only regarded as having rude behavior, but notoriously never went out on war expeditions, so a bit of a coward maybe. Yngvi obtained reputation as a Viking, and when he came back, he caught the attention of the queen, which is King Alfred's wife, named Bera. And it reads, Queen Bera sat often till late in the evening, and she and Yngvi conversed together for their amusement. But when King Alfred tried to tell her to stop, she said that any woman would be luckier to be with Yngvi rather than King Alfred. Unsurprisingly, King Alfred is quite angry about this, but that's where kind of that conversation ends. Going on to the next scene, one evening, Alfred went into the hall where Yngvi and Bera sat on Hásæti speaking to each other. When Alfred sees this, I'll go to the next scene. Alfred approaches, sorry, I went too far. Alfred approaches the high seat, takes out his sword, and stabs Yngvi again and again. Yngvi jumps up, takes out his weapon, and in turn killed Alfred. In this case study, we can see that although awkward, Bera and Yngvi's affair isn't grounds enough to kill Yngvi. However, once Alfred sees them sitting with each other on the high seat, Alfred being, as is suggested, a bit of a coward, it is then he feels the need to kill his brother, suggesting that sitting on Hásæti together is more than just a sexual relationship, but one of political significance in union. Further on in Ynglinga Saga, there are two kings named King Granmar and King Hjörvards. King Granmar invites King Hjörvards to a feast. It describes the feast setting in this manner. King Hjörvards' Hásæti was prepared across from King Granmar's Hásæti and sat all his men on the same bench. So we can confer that some circumstances do require multiple high seats to be prepared and individuals sitting on them. King Granmar's daughter, Hildegun, is invited to pass mead around in a silver cup, which holds a lot of significance. And you can read up on this as well if you'd like, about women passing mead inside of the hall. That it's in a silver cup as well is very powerful imagery. When she offered to King Hjörvard, he took the cup and took her hand and said she must sit beside him. He formally invites her to join him on the high seat, and after deliberating some Viking laws about male and female drinking rituals, it reads, Then Hildegun sat down beside him, and both drank together and spoke a great deal with each other during the evening. The night ends, and only after this do they marry each other. This shows again another case where someone joins on the high seat, as well as reveals that there can be more than one high seat present in a setting. The potential meaning for this is that the joining on the high seat doesn't necessarily equate a formal union like a marriage would, but does still suggest a sexual and symbolic political union. Further, Hildegun sitting on the high seat transformed the event from a feast to a courting event. Further, two people of equal rank, according to this sort of event, would have separate Hásæti arrangements. And again, going back to the imagery here that he had taken her hand, it's going back to that imagery of a man and woman joining hands, making, again, a transformative event. In the final case study, this is supported. This is supported as well, where we turn to Brennunjarlsaga. Inside of the story, Hrut travels to Norway, and the Queen Mother Gunhildr offers to house them and help them with her son, the king. When Hrut is brought into the hall, it reads, this is the Old Norse, and I've underlined the important passages here with Hásæti, síðan settist kon hjá Hruti og drukku þá. It was hung with beautiful tapestries, and there Gunhild had her Hásæti. Ogmund spoke, now you'll see that what I told you about Gunhild is true, that her seat, because the translation at the time, I think, was something else, but so that's her. Oh, the translators called it a throne, I believe, and I turned it back to seat. That's her seat. Sit in it, and you'll be allowed to hold it even after she arrives. He then treated them to a feast. They had only been seated a short time when Gunhild arrived. Hrut was all ready to jump up and greet her. Remain seated, she said. You shall always have this seat as long as you are my guest. She sat down beside him on Hásæti, and they drank together. That evening she said, you shall lie with me tonight in the upper room, just the two of us. That's for you to decide, he said. Then they went to bed, and she bolted the door, and they slept there that night. They remain coupled until Hrut returns to Iceland, but Gunhild pointedly keeps her relationship with Hrut a secret from her son Harald. This case study again supports that the high seat is a shared space, but even more pointedly that there is another female who sits alone on the high seat, beyond Eriksen. And although extremely powerful, Gunhild is not a vulva, pointing, or I think it's spákona in Eriksen, pointing out to the misnomer of the Sirasa seat when referring to the high seats and seat figurines. The ground material also supports the textual sources and that there are images of double seats. Further, Jonsson and Moland mention this Gotlandic, the Gotlandic picture stone. They do refer to it in the frame of the Siras. They do refer to it in the frame of the Sirasa seat. However, now that we know what we know, this image shows two individuals seated equally on in a location held above the rest of the scenery, suggesting a representation of Hásæti, given what the literary sources say, is not too far-fetched. These two images of dual seats archaeologically support the literature in that Hásæti seems to mean a location rather than a single seat, and that there seems to be a ritualistic side to two individuals, namely male and female, sitting on Hásæti together. All these cases affect not only the shared space, but those who are metaphysically observing the unions or the significant events happening in front of them. This shows that Hásæti isn't just a seat for seeresses, but a position of significance that ritualistically shifts the lives of those observing. Depending on the events occurring around the seat, the space transforms. It transforms not only those who sit in the seat, but also those who observe the scene. Extended beyond being called the seeress seat, the position is actually much more complex and intimate in action for everyone in the space, whether seated or not. From mythology to the sagas to archaeology, the figurine, the figures sitting on Hásæti act as the central images. We, even as readers, are watching them and engaging with them as the audience, while they act out the ceremonial requirements required to sit on Hásæti. We're also watching Hásæti transform the space, the people who sit on it, and possibly even ourselves. The transformative nature of the space and the power that seated positions have in the archaeological material is undeniable, perhaps even making the Lyra figurine we see here even more prominent in that it is fluid in gender, age, and position. We as the audience could just as easily be being represented by the seated figurine, transcending gender, time, and space, as Hásæti is often shown to do in most of the literature and archaeology. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a lovely day.